Great, great.
So what do you know?
Consultants. I'm a civil engineer. Lisa is a planner. So CT Consultant serves as the city engineer for the city of Fort Thomas. And we were involved in the community plan. The city asked us to update the zoning ordinance with several goals in mind as part of the zoning ordinance. We've had, guys, how many meetings have we had? And I recognize a lot of familiar faces who have been at those meetings. We probably had 6 or 7 meetings so far. Yeah, regarding the update to the zoning code. And one of the aspects of the, and Lisa, stop, I'm speaking plannings, so somebody stop me if I start to say something incorrect. So one of the aspects of the zoning code update is the introduction of form-based code, as opposed to the traditional, that's probably not the right word, just as opposed to the Euclidean code. So we anticipated as part of the meeting this evening that will be with Planning Commission, that will start at 6:30. We anticipated that there would be a lot of questions associated with what form-based code is, how it's applied. So the thought was to have an informational session that would be open to the public. Planning commissioners are purposefully not at this meeting. If the Planning Commission were here, then it would be an official public meeting. This was set up to be an informational meeting to review the basics of the difference between Euclidean and form-based code, and really to answer questions, just to have a conversation. We did not anticipate having this many people. That's fantastic, but we anticipated basically a roundtable discussion. Did I do okay?
Awesome.
Okay.
So we'll take a little bit of a further step back. About a year ago, the city decided that it was time to really start implementing the community plan, and part of the, as Frank says, part of those implementations is updating the zoning ordinance. And the community plan talks about adding form-based code in 3 distinct areas of town. And those are the 3 maps that I showed you. Inverness, Midway, and the community plan calls downtown town. So those are the 3 portions of town where we'll be having form-based code, which, as Frank said, is different than a conventional zoning district. So this meeting is really meant to sort of have as Frank said, to have a conversation about what we mean by form-based code, because it's a completely different conversation than anything we've had to date with the Planning Commission, as a completely different way of viewing zoning. So what I gave to all of you, and I apologize if we didn't have enough handouts, as Frank said, we didn't anticipate this many people. It's just some guides to help you understand the difference between traditional zoning or Euclidean zoning and form-based code. So I'm going to just sort of start through this, but even though we have more people than we thought, feel free, because this is supposed to be a conversation, to raise your hand and let's have that conversation as best we can. So as we alluded to, there are basically 3 different types of zoning that's done in the United States. There is Euclidean, conventional or traditional zoning, which is what Fort Thomas has had historically. There is form-based codes and there are hybrid codes. Conventional or Euclidean codes are all use-based. So if you look at this, they're all use-based, and it's meant to have a large separation of uses. So for example, there's one area of town where you've got single family, another area of town where you've got multifamily, another area of town where you've got commercial, another area of town where you have industrial.
Excuse me, which handout is that in?
It is the types of zoning. Looks like that. Yeah, so you have 3 different, should have 3 different handouts, and it looks like this is the evidence. Thank you. Okay. And so this is sort of an overview here, and then we'll move deeper into this in a few minutes. So basically, when you're, if you have your home today is in a single-family detached dwelling district. That is an example of a traditional zoning district, because even you can tell by the name of it. It is all use-based. What we're talking about is segregating land uses by zoning districts. And that's how it has been done in the United States since 1920, essentially. The other major type that we'll be talking about in more detail in a minute is form-based code for those 3 areas of town, Midway, downtown, and Inverness. The foundation of a form-based code is exactly the name of it, the form of the building. But that does not mean that use isn't a component of it. Then the final example of zoning is a hybrid code, which is what Fort Thomas will ultimately have, which is a combination of both conventional districts and form-based districts. So the only 3 portions of town that will have form-based will be those 3 areas. Everything that's zoned single-family today in your neighborhoods will continue to be zoned single-family as a part of the zoning ordinance update, with a couple of rare exceptions. But for example, if your home is zoned R1C today, it's going to be zoned R1C at the end of this process. So the only thing that we're talking about changing in terms of concepts, how we do zoning, are for those 3 areas. So let's sort of move through this handout for a minute, and then I'm going to start taking some questions. So as I said, traditional Euclidean zoning focuses on the type of use of land, and it's based on the notion that each land use, each space, each lot should have only one singular use. Form-based zone focuses on building form as it relates to streetscape and adjacent uses. It encourages mixed use, and it relies on design concepts and patterns intended to preserve the assets and character of a community. And that is really, really why the community plan chose and recommends form-based codes for these areas, because those 3 areas of town define Fort Thomas, and the character is very important. So therefore, the plan recommends using form-based code in those 3 areas. So this handout, I'm just going to, is a graphic representation of what I've been saying. For the traditional code, the foundation is use, with a little bit of design, and even less form of the building. For a form-based code, a little bit of use, a little bit of design, and a whole lot of building form. Again, all to deal with creating the character that you want for those 3 portions of town. So as I said, traditional zoning focuses and attempts to segregate uses, and form-based code preserves community character through design requirements. So again, that's why it's being chosen for those 3 districts. I'm about to stop talking, I promise. So traditional zoning creates uniformity by applying some very blunt tools. And those are things like setbacks, meaning how far the building can be from the lot line, heights, densities, and floor area ratios. Very, very blunt tools in terms of deciding where on a lot a building can go. That is the key to form-based zoning, is understanding how the building relates to the street and the streetscape and the character. Form-based code focuses on the role of individual buildings to shape the public realm or the public streetscape. So again, that was very much a goal from the community plan for those 3 areas of town. So I'm going to be really quiet right now and open it up. And this handout here really is just an overview. So I'm going to open it up for your questions about, why the community plan recommends form-based code, how it differs from conventional zoning, or any other topics that may be concerning you, and why you came to.
I have a question.
Sir?
On this picture here of Miller and Lumley,
Yes, sir?
we've got those 5 houses going down Miller. That blue, does that mean you can actually take those houses and tear them down and build a business there?
All right, so this conversation is really, really about the differences between conventional and traditional zoning.
What is that, yes or no?
So the answer to that question is going down Lumley. That particular.
Going down Miller.
Excuse me, Miller.
Well, it'd be Miller and Lumley.
Yeah.
Those blue.
So the neighborhood transition use.
If they change that zoning, does that mean you can tear those down and build
No.
something else?
No,
Then how come we're changing it? How come it's just not residential?
because it's not residential today.
It's multi-use right now.
It's technically in parts
It's
of business.
CBD
It's
right
CBD.
now.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be residential
Those are
then?
all zoned as residential.
These-
Those houses are all zoned as residential.
These three are. Those three are not.
Which three are we talking about?
If I remember correctly, these three are not part of the CBD and these are.
Okay, it says, when it says neighborhood transition, that means it's gonna stay the same?
It can be a number of different things, but the thing that we will talk about in the next meeting is a concept called building type. There are different types of form-based codes, and because predictability for the built environment was a goal from the community plan, certain building types are prescribed for each subzone. For that particular subzone, I will tell you what the building types permitted are as soon as I find it. So-
Right now, what it is right now, is that what you're gonna tell us? What you can do right now?
No, what you can do right now, for the ones that are currently zoned central business district,
Yeah, down, these like blue ones down Miller.
is tear them down and put businesses in. That's what you can do today.
So if someone bought them right now, they could do that and their grandfather then?
If they bought it today and they tore it down and put in a commercial building, they could do so.
Oh, Lord, okay.
What we are proposing for the neighborhood transition are traditional single-family, which is what's there, compact single-family, which is what's there, duplexes, which is what's there, row houses, and small multifamily, because that's what's there.
I'm sorry to stop you, that's not what's there. There are no row houses there, there are no duplexes.
There are duplexes, there are no row houses, you're correct, and I didn't say that, but there
On
are.
Miller Lane?
Yes,
Okay, are you talking about the two-family?
Two-
on
basically, yeah.
On the left side, when you're going down Miller, there's two families.
Aren't they on top of each other?
no, the next door to each other.
They're, well, you go in and go upstairs for one, and then one's,
It depends on which one. There's some that are both.
Yes, but there are duplexes.
one's upstairs, one's downstairs, so both of them are like that, and then the apartment on the right side, they're on top. So I don't think you have what you're saying, a duplex. We don't have that on Miller Lane, or Lumber.
Duplex is as two family units
In a single building.
in a single.
Oh, okay, so it doesn't matter if it's on top or not, okay. Okay, I thought you meant like row houses.
No, it doesn't
Okay.
matter whether they're next to each other, one on top of each other,
Okay,
anything like that.
Thank
It's
you.
still a duplex.
thank you.
Could you describe a row house?
So a row house would actually be, for example, what you see on Green Street, where it is two attached units together next to each other, as opposed to one on top of the other or whatever else that you call it.
Does a duplex have, like say, 100A, 100B, or is it 100 and 105? I know that on Green it's like 20, 25, 30, 30, like address.
So the
totally
address
separate.
is something separate than zoning, and depending upon how it was addressed over time, it may be 101A and 101B, or it may be 101 and 103.
So
But
depending on
address-
what's available.
Depending upon what's available in the address range for that lot. But
So-
those addresses are separate from zoning.
I think maybe this will help. A duplex tends to have, whether it's side by side or up or lower, tends to have a single owner. Do row houses tend to have individual owners per unit?
So, again, zoning does not deal with ownership. That is actually not permitted for zoning to deal with ownership. So, and there are cases where duplexes are owned separately. There are cases where
Very
duplexes
common.
are owned in condominiums. There are cases where typically row houses are on individual lots and separately owned. But I reviewed a plan yesterday where the row houses were all, commonly owned.
Sure, corporations
so
would come into it,
corporations.
but generally,
So, but
they
ownership
tend
is
to be
not a
more
problem.
single ownership
It
per
tends to
unit.
be, but doesn't necessarily have to be. And again, zoning really can't deal with ownership. That is not our purview per the Supreme Court. So we are dealing with, when we're talking about conventional districts, use and use only and some very blunt tools for setbacks and height. When we start talking about form, then we add in the component of very tightly prescribing what a building, where it can be on the lot. And because community character was a large portion of the conversation here, we are talking about building types. Because for example, in the conversation that we've had previously, It was, we really don't want X type of building torn down. And so because of that, we have actually gone in certain places and said traditional single-family would be a permitted building type because that was very important to us to maintain the type of character that's in some of these subzones. So again, and we'll talk about this more fully in the next meeting, each of these subzones really is designed both in terms of building type and the placement of the building on the lot to create the character for the three areas for the form-based code that your community desires. And they're broken into subzones because, as someone just pointed out, downtown is not uniform, right? You have a character on Lumley, and you have a character in downtown, and you have a character on Audubon Place. So that's why each of those subzones are that way. But anyway, so in terms of, but we knew that as we were about to move into this next meeting to talk about form-based code, there were going to be a lot of questions as to how it was different from traditional zoning. And to answer that question is basically the most different because you're prescribing where the building can go on the lot and the type of building, and then as a secondary concern, the use. There has been some confusion that by prescribing the building type, we're not going to be talking about use. We are. Use will still be a part of the conversation.
So, back to a more generic question.
Sure.
You say form-based zoning is rather new compared to classical zoning.
Well, it depends on your definition. It started in the late 80s.
So the question is, how common is it? And is there another area of Cincinnati that we can compare to that's had it for a while?
Cincinnati's had it since 2013.
Not an urban area, more of this city
Bellevue
suburb.
has had it.
So Bellevue has it.
And I don't remember the year it was adopted.
And
but
it's
Bellevue
on,
has
is it only on their business district or is it in a residential area?
My recollection is it's in their business district. It tends to be used in two cases. In downtown areas like these three that we're talking about here, and what we call suburban repair, where you have, buildings set way far back and a sea of parking in the front. Then communities are then repairing the area by using form-based code. There are some communities who do use it in residential areas, but not as many as who use it in more commercial ones. Yes, ma'am.
I just keep feeling as if I'm going backwards. Prior to this meeting, the community plan is not a mandate. It was an evaluation. We are not obligated to accept their plan. It's a plan designed for 5 years. We're 4 years into it. So now suddenly we're changing everything because, and people who are on the community who were on that years ago, I'm certainly not speaking for them. I wasn't on it, wasn't asked to be on it. Don't know if I'd have been interested. I can't go back in time. The fact is, some people say, we put in all this time, and when it came down to it, we were sold down the river with one Highland, and it's going to happen again because that was not our intention. So I've heard that from more than one person, and again, I'm not speaking for me.
So if we want to, I'm happy to talk about that. But are there any more generic questions before we move in that direction from anybody?
I think I understand this, but I want to just make sure, and maybe and she brought up one time, maybe a real world example would help us making sure we understand. So let me put forth a situation. Let's say Guardian Savings which is that very modern, doesn't really fit in glass front bank on them. If that was sold and somebody tore it down and wanted to build a building there, they would be told it can't be modern because we want it to fit in with the rest of Fort Thomas. Is that correct? Would it be prescribed that they need to have a certain amount of green space in front? Would building materials be, and they would only be allowed to go so high, which I think is probably in the zoning now.
It is.
Okay.
So to a certain extent, yes. And
Okay.
I apologize, I don't remember where the Guardian Bank is.
It's next to the post office.
Oh, next to the post office.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, great. Yeah, got it. Okay, so I was sitting in front of it literally. So the area that you see in this darker blue is called the core mixed use. And where that is is where we are most tightly defining where the building has to go on the lot. Now, what we are not talking about in the form-based code is the style of the building
Okay.
or materials or any of those kinds of things. But if you will look at the draft that's online, you will see that we are saying it has to have a certain minimum height. We are saying the first floor has to be a certain minimum height. We are saying it has to have a certain amount of transparency adjacent to the right-of-way. So therefore, you don't have that closed-off feeling that you have with some of the banks in downtown. We are talking about the rhythm of the openings. We are talking about all sorts of form elements that will move you toward a certain building type. But I will not tell you that someone can't build a modern-looking building that meets those standards. It was a conscious choice when we had this discussion with the Planning Commission back last fall, to not be talking about architectural design guidelines, that to leave it a little more open, but where the building sits on the lot, how much transparency it is, all the rhythm of the openings, heights, all of those things were things that they wanted to regulate.
When you say rhythm of openings, do you mean like sidewalk access plus the entrance and exits to the lot? Is that what you mean?
So when I mean
by
rhythm
that?
of openings, and thank you for calling me out on that, I mean where the entrances are to each building, how that relates to the windows in the building, so that you don't end up, for example, with a building that has a single entry point and brick.
Right.
We will not, that would not be permitted in any place in this district.
Gotcha.
Where you see this sort of lighter shade of blue, I sort of call it Duke blue, that makes me, this is the traditional mixed use. And what we heard during our previous meetings was that moving buildings to the sidewalk along here, and this is essentially from the Sonic Lodge up to Forest, and from Nicholas Place down to, I never pronounce this. Thank you. That there should be a greater setback there. That we really wanted that building's intensity at the street only in this dark blue area. So, and that really was a very much a reflection of what we heard. So while one Highland is one Highland and can be at the sidewalk, as it's currently proposed today, it doesn't mean the Planning Commission is going to recommend it and the council is ultimately going to approve it. You could not replicate that here. In this area that, like I said, I call it Duke blue. So again, that is very much a reflection of what we heard previously to this. And that is very much why, while this is all CBD today, it is now broken up into 3 areas. Because the key behind the form-based code is to create the form and the character that you want. And largely the way you do that in a downtown space is where the building sits on the lot.
I have a question. You mentioned that it would regulate minimum height. I'm probably more concerned about maximum height.
So
Limit that as well.
it does limit that as well. What is currently in the draft, and again, what we'll be talking about after the development review in the next meeting, that maximum height is 50 feet, and that's what it is today. That is not being changed at all through this process.
Do you know what the tallest building in that?
The one Highland is the tallest.
But keep in, yes, so one Highland is right at 50 feet.
Oh, and it got raised too, didn't it?
No, it did not. It
They
did
were
not.
proposing to
reduced.
They
tried to make it 53. So can we bring it down? Can we all say that, man, that's a little too high, it makes it a little more enclosed? Can we make the maximum maybe 40 feet, 10 feet lower than that? Keep
So-
it with the style of town still?
You know, that is certainly a discussion that, you know, that is a key conversation to have with the planning
Oh,
commission when
okay,
we
so-
move
okay.
out there.
Okay.
And so I don't mean to close you off.
Oh, no, I understand. Your time limited.
And so we do have about 15 more minutes before you have to move to the next meeting. So back to what you asked me. Yes, go ahead.
There will be designations of height.
There will be a
There will
designations
be
of height.
Debatable price, I would guess, or
Yes.
else you have to name it.
But keep in mind that it is going to be limited not only by the subzone, but also by the building type itself, right? There will be height limits, minimums and maximums for the building types. But, for example, right now, from about, and the map's upside down. From here, all of those single-family homes today are non-conforming. They're non-conforming use, and so anyone who's occupying it as a single-family home is doing so in a non-conforming way. Under this current proposal, that does change
To what?
to being a permitted use and a permitted building type within the Duke Blue area. So lots of what is on these maps, both on the maps and in the text itself, reflects what we've heard in these previous meetings. All right, any more general, yes, sir?
The only question I have is that maybe I'm trying to understand what form-based zoning is in our particular city. It's basically a format for the planning commission to use to develop these core areas.
It is standards for the planning commission.
Standards.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And, and hopefully I'm saying it clearly
But the
if I'm
city
not.
planning commission is still making the final decision on what will be permitted and what will not,
Well, let's back
under these
that up.
guidelines.
Yes, so the way zoning works in the US is if you have standards within your code, and I'm just going to be really honest with you, because this is really important for y'all to get. If there are standards in your code that say, for example, a building can only be X number of feet tall, and someone proposes a building X feet tall, the planning commission does not have the authority to deny approval of that building if they meet the standard. So it's very key that we define the standards closely, because once the standards are in place for an administrative review, which is what a site plan would be in these areas, the planning commission has very little latitude to turn it down if it meets those regulations. So defining what we regulate and then how those numbers, and what those numbers are in the regulations at this point is key. Now, that doesn't mean if someone comes in and the planning commission doesn't have a little bit of wiggle room to say, think about this or think about that. But by and large, if they meet the regulations, the planning commission really does have to approve it. So the conversation we're having now is extremely important. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is my first time, I haven't heard about this, so I'm wondering, why is this more advantageous to what we have? And what's gonna happen with the green space?
So which green space are you talking about?
All of the above. There's been a lot of houses going in, I mean, one of the things, I'm not from this area. I'm not from Kentucky, I'm from Michigan. One of the things that drew me to Fort Thomas was the green space, and the fact that there really wasn't anywhere to build until people started filling in or whatnot, but I see a lot of that green space going.
So what we're talking about here is the form-based code for those three areas. More generically, all the property in town today, outside of those three areas, is zoned something. Whether it's R1 single family, or central business district, or general commercial, or whatever else. Because we live in a country where property rights are paramount, once that property is zoned, for example, single family, and it's been vacant for 30 years, if someone comes along and they want to put a house on it, the city has no ability to say no. The only time they can say no is if the land's in a conservation easement or they own it. The city owns it. So while a piece of property may have been vacant for a period of time, if it has zoning and if it is owned privately, if it meets the zoning, the city has to approve it. They have no latitude to do otherwise.
Well, I'm still confused as to why this is better than what is now. What is that doing? Who's making the money, I guess, or what is?
So I don't know what you mean by why this is better, because
Why do you want to change the zoning?
Yeah, 'cause
Why is that better from what traditional zoning is?
Okay. So again, outside of the three areas that we talked about, the traditional or conventional zoning will continue. That is not being changed as a part of this. For these three areas, the community plan put forth that community character was paramount. So keeping what you want your downtown, or creating what you want your downtown to look like, was so important that it was worth putting in additional regulations. And that's it in a nutshell. Because right now, you have very, very blunt tools to regulate development in downtown. So for example, there are no setbacks for downtown right now. The only standard you have is height. And so it basically says, you come in and propose a building in downtown, the planning commission will evaluate it. And that's it. That's what you got. So,
Yeah, we got one in Highland, and we had that before, so it doesn't make sense. So we have this monstrosity now in the middle of town, and we had this before. So all of a sudden, you're saying that you're gonna change this, and it doesn't sound like it's making any improvement.
Will the changes make it more or less likely to have another development like One Highland?
so what this will do is this very dark area that you see as blue, you could get one Highland. But you cannot. Right now, you get one Highland from one end of downtown, from Forest, all the way to the other. What this does is prevent one Highland in everything that is not dark blue. So this is a very, very large change from your current zoning.
So what you're saying is that if this was in place however many years ago, One Highland would have been less likely to happen?
I am telling you that the central business district, as it's currently defined, would have allowed one Highland from one end to the other today, or 10 years ago. What this does is just limit that type of intense development here. You know, but, so, and I think that's being responsive to what we've heard. Does that answer your question?
One Highland is in the dark blue.
Yes.
So it would have still been allowed.
It would have still been allowed.
But it can't creep up
And
or
it can't
down.
creep
The setbacks are farther back. So One Highland, the areas that a One Highland could happen are
So
defined in
it
these
wouldn't
dark
stop
blue.
One Highland from happening where it is today, but it could maybe prevent other developments happening in the future in those areas.
In the area, but again, this dark blue
Right, and the light blues.
is one Highland all over again. As it, well, let me take that back. The height, the scale, the placement of the building would allow one Highland to exist. There may be development standards that are proposed that might change the development slightly.
How do we change that so One Highland can't happen again?
Well, that's something you would raise to the planning commission. If you think this dark blue area should be smaller, then that's a conversation you need to have with the planning commission at the next meeting. At 6:30. Yes, ma'am.
Just real quick, regarding the zoning, so you can have multiple families, like building like a multifamily, right? So bringing in more children to the area, is that correct?
In these areas?
Yeah.
So today, all of downtown, you could have residential above the first floor.
Okay.
So that, this is not changing that.
Okay, so more children, but we're landlocked with our schools. And our school right now, with the new law that just passed yesterday, that we need to have a police officer in every single school, we can't even afford that. So how has the committee thought of, what are we gonna do with the schools when we bring in more kids?
But what I'm saying is, this actually makes no change to that.
It actually can decrease
It actually
density.
could decrease
Because
it.
now, single families are permitted, whereas right now, you are not permitted to build a single family home in that zone. Those businesses that were once single families, that were converted to businesses, cannot be converted back to single families.
Today.
It's not permitted.
Today.
So if you wanted to build any kind of residential unit in the central business district today, it would have to be multifamily, and it would have to be above either retail or office.
That's how it is today.
That's how it is today.
So what we're saying is, these changes, in and of themselves, do not create any more multifamily than is already a possibility today. And they give the possibility that it's even fewer amounts of multifamily, because both the building type of single family and the use of single family is allowed.
And that was all from information received back from the community.
Because truthfully, when we started this process, we were told, this is the map of downtown, and, it should all look like, buildings at the street. But we heard from lots of different people that that was not what you wanted, and this map is a reflection of that. Yes, ma'am?
We're very focused on this, which I know is extremely important, but I've been to meetings where you're talking about the Alexandria corridor, which they are talking about multi-unit, 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 all over out there. So you're saying it's different here, but changing that is drastically different than what is here.
So I'm more than happy to have another conversation about Alexandria corridor at a different time. But again, keep in mind that while there are certain things happening out there, in many cases along the corridor, multifamily would be allowed today.
Right, but they don't exist. I mean, I know, here's what I think a lot of the concern is, from what I hear, is it's a common thing now in America, where big corporations, not necessarily from our country, buy whole streets, level them to the ground, build these huge multi-family developments that no one can afford, that no one wants, but guess what, they own it, and by God, if you're allowed to build it, they'll build it, and they'll build it, and they'll build it. And it's taking suburbia away. We are a bedroom community. We are a suburb. I myself, this is strictly me, don't know why we're trying to make it a business. We're not downtown Cincinnati. We're 3 miles. We can go downtown if we want.
I agree with you.
There's been a question. She's had her hand up behind you for
I
the
am so
longest
sorry.
time.
I am so sorry.
It's okay, and maybe this is a question that I haven't been to some of the other meetings, but you keep talking about they, and this is what the community wanted. That's part of the community. When I look back on like the long-range planning, there were 900 some surveys that were answered, 900 out of 17,000 people. That's like hardly, and when you go back to even some of the other sections that were answered, there were like 400 responses or 500 responses. That's really not a great, so if they're the ones, whoever these are, making those decisions, that doesn't seem like, it's not my city view, and I don't think it's a lot of people's city view, so maybe we need to revisit that. And that was over 5 years ago, before the pandemic, before people were putting money in their houses. I mean, it's a whole different city right now.
So as I said, the community plan is what we were charged with implementing. And the community plan has been adopted by the city as the vision for the future. But that doesn't mean that it's written in stone. Like lots of what's in that plan, we have heard other things come at us, and as a result have made the changes that we'll be discussing more later on. So just because that's the plan that's adopted doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to implement every single part of it through this zoning code update. As I've already said, we have made very large changes already based on what we've heard, and certainly the Planning Commission is willing to make even more changes. And again, I can't stress that enough. Frank and I, our job is to take the community plan initially and make recommendations based on that. And then we bring that to the Planning Commission and the community, and we hear what you have to say. And we've tried very, very hard to implement all of that. So if you have concerns, you really do need to express those to the Planning Commission. Yes, sir.
I read in the first part of the diagnostic report, all this is talking about changing zoning, but one of your recommendations is to empower the Planning Commission to grant waivers to zoning ordinance. So why would we, as part of the change, is giving them the power to grant waivers without it going to the Board of Adjustment?
So, yes, for 2 reasons. One, the state of Kentucky very, very strictly limits.
But that can change. The state can change that definition.
But they haven't changed it for 30 years. So the state
Then they're
limits,
due.
I'm sorry?
Then they're probably due.
The state limits the types of things that a variance can be granted for. And I've worked in a lot of different states, and that is very, very unusual. So that's one issue. The other issue is you're living in an environment where you're largely built out. So if you, for example, want to redevelop a building downtown and the first floor building height as it exists today is less than the ideal standard that we'll be talking about in a few minutes in the next meeting, then that gives the planning commission the ability to waive that standard, so that building.
So it won't follow into this new plan? You're just talking about it, if it follows into the new plan, it won't matter what the zone is now?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
So if you're saying that granting a waiver right now would be beneficial because of how things are currently?
Correct. But right now, the planning commission has the ability to grant some waivers, but not very many. And that is a constraint. And so under the current proposal, they'd be allowed to grant waivers just because we have so many, you have so many.
So why would it be so there was, I think in the past 5 years, there's been 70 waivers, so why not just let it go to the Board of Adjustment?
So the planning commission has, I am not aware, and I don't think Kevin's here, that the planning commission has granted that many waivers in the last 5 years.
The Board of Adjustment has.
But the Board of Adjustment has granted variances.
Variances, I'm sorry.
Yes, and so the Board of Adjustment grants many, single-family detached variances because,
It's only like 15 a year.
actually, in some
Let it
cases,
go
they're
there.
doing 15 a month. I looked at the records over the last 5 years. But in many
It's only
cases,
7.
in many cases, the standards that you have for your, because most of them are single-family, in many cases, the standards that you have for your single-family districts were placed on the districts without recognizing what your existing built environment looks like for your single-family homes. So you have many single-family homes today that don't meet your zoning ordinance standards. And so when someone wants to approve, they have to go to BZA.
So if we're fixing the zoning ordinances to fix the problems you're talking about, why would we need to give power to the planning commission to grant waivers?
So let's back up for a second. Many of the issues for variances for single-family homes are being fixed through this zoning ordinance update. So that's one, and that's all at all the traditional zones. In the form-based zones, we are regulating like 38 features of development in order to create the character that you like as a community. And because, as I said, you have an existing built environment, it's going to be difficult for some of those buildings to improve and meet all of those standards. And because the state of Kentucky, for example, allow the Board of Zoning Appeals to grant a variance to the amount of transparency or windows on the front of the building, the waiver would allow the planning commission to do so. But the planning commission is not getting any additional authority to, for example, give a front setback variance. They are not getting that. That will rest today and in the future with the Board of Zoning Appeals. All right, so we've got to move to the next meeting, but is there one more final question?
I have one comment. Repeatedly, I want everybody to hear this. Repeatedly, or the last 2 months, not this week, but the 2 prior meetings at City Council, I asked that a public information session be offered to the public, and the City Council said absolutely not. So I admire that you're doing it. I don't know who launched it. I know it's not the mayor, because he said, not until you make a recommendation will anybody be able to have anything in public. And I admire you for answering the questions and standing
Yes,
here.
thank you very much.
And I really think we need to get on to the City Council and the mayor to say, look, once it goes to them for the final vote, to me, it's done.
I have one other comment. I was on some of those committees, and all due respect, it was, yes, we were given, do you like A or B for your city, not C, which is what I want. It's do you want this or do you want that? So I keep hearing, and now it's for several different meetings and stuff that I hear, it's, well, this is what they wanted for the community. This is what the city, the community wanted for the city. Not always, and there were comments that I heard when all those cute little diagrams were out there, and people were saying, and this section here is a blight on the city. And they were nice residential homes, maintained. They were not blights. They were not $500,000, $700,000, $800,000 homes, but they were well-maintained, nice homes. But the person that had the little chart was saying, this section is a blight on the city. So I disagree that this is what we, the community, actually wanted. It was a choice of A or B. Tell us what you like. So to be fair,
And I will say, if I didn't say this clearly earlier, I apologize. The community plan is the starting point.
but the problem is, it keeps getting thrown in everyone's face. It's not a starting point. This is what you said you wanted, this is what we're gonna do. And that's where I keep hearing, and I get bristled on it, is that's not necessarily what we were told that was gonna be. It was, like you said, a starting point, but now it's always, well, this is what you guys wanted. This is what you wanted. It's not necessarily what we wanted.
I think we like our community the way it is.
So
I'm just saying.
I'm going to clarify something that I just want to be sure. When we're talking about one island being run all the way down the street, so these houses right now, I just went by them today, are single-family homes. And, at some point in time, there's 6 of them. They're next to the Masonic Lodge, shown on the left. At some point, those were single-family homes. There's big yards there. There's big side yards. There's big front yards. What's proposed in there, Alicia, I'm taking this right off the website. This is what I want to clarify, because if it's not right, I want to know. But what's proposed on the website for those 6 big homes is row houses, multifamily dwellings, dwelling units above non-residential uses, residential care facilities for persons with disabilities.
So let's
But it was said that wasn't gonna happen.
So let's take a step back.
Right.
Is it yes or no, I think?
No, it's not a yes or no. Because
not a yes or no.
again, we are talking about use and building type. So, what is permitted for those 6 lots are various building types that I read out, various uses. But the big change is that they are no longer allowed for those buildings as it's currently drafted. But again, we'll have an opportunity with the planning commission for you to give your concerns.
But is that proposed though, at least, that's all I want to know, because yes, people can tear them down. I hope they become 6 mansions. I really do. Does everybody want 6 mansions? It's not real pretty. But what could happen? And in the city plan, on page 8, start with the end in mind, from city code. What could happen is a developer could come in here, offer, everything's got a price. Offer those 6 people, I mean, one of the properties has already changed hands. But, and we could have, by what you got on here, we can have row houses, we can have multifamily dwellings, which from your October presentation could be big multifamily dwellings. And we can have residential care facilities for persons with disability, which I think you told us in a previous meeting includes drug and alcohol treatment. So is that what you're proposing, row houses, multifamily dwellings for the area with the 6 single-family homes?
So again, let's talk about building type. What would be permitted there is multifamily with flex space, large multifamily, small multifamily, row houses, and traditional single family. So that's the building type.
How on earth does that preserve the character of our town? You're talking about essentially changing the character of our town.
Yes.
I don't know if it's your idea, city council's idea, I don't know whose idea this is, but this is not preserving the essential character.
So, but what I would ask you to do is when we get to that portion of the presentation tonight, say that to the planning commission. Because again, our role is to draft what we are told to by the planning commission.
Who told you to draft it? That's what I want to know. Who told you?
So we started with the community plan as a starting point. We took the phase 1 and said, these are the things that we think we heard from the community plan. This was back in the fall. And as a result of that, the traditional single-family home is now permitted building type, which it wasn't before. The buildings were
Which it is not now.
Which it is not now. So again, please keep that in mind. Today, someone could tear down from Masonic Lodge all the way to Forest and build one Highland. That could happen tomorrow.
So how is one Highland any different from row houses, large multifamily dwellings, and dwelling units above non-residential?
It's different because if you look at the form standards, it's set further back on the lot. The width of the building is prescribed or mandated, which was not the case with one Highland. All of those things, because it's not just the use that defines your character, it's how the building looks as it addresses the street, how far back it sits from the street. and how wide it is, because part of what you're reacting to with One Highlands is both the height and the width.
Yeah, the density of it.
And so these buildings, so while you're talking about uses, we're also talking about building types. And each of those building types is limited in width, precisely because of the concerns we heard from you.
But Alicia, so we're talking about the city plan, which is a policy guide from page 7. But in there was a community survey results of 970 people responded. Of those 917, only 17 felt that additional housing options were needed. Of those 17%, only 34% thought that we should have cluster homes. Only 42% thought we should have townhomes. 56% wanted single-family homes. What you've proposed, for whatever reason, I don't know who told you to do this, but you're proposing high-density housing going down Fort Thomas Avenue. You're proposing large multifamily dwellings and row houses that you described as buildings right next to each other.
So let's adjourn to the next meeting.
Thank you for having me.
So, I think that family, it's in downtown, so when you read it, and I'm a resident. When I grew up in downtown, this